Welcome to the Only Male Cruz show, the We On Your Head podcast. Discussing topics that make you say, how and where can we improve as a society? From a Black American's perspective. Copyright disclaimer regarding fair use is in full effect. The views and opinions expressed in this show, you guessed it, they're all mine. Catch this live, be ready to speak. This is a call-in show. Be sure to hit the like button, share, subscribe, replay gang, leave a comment. You know I want to hear from you. Let's go to work. All right. It's been a minute. Welcome to the Only Male Cruz show, the podcast. I am the Only Male Cruz We On Your Head podcast. Let me see. Thanks for pulling up. Y'all, we're about to do this quick little book review. Really not even a review, more so a discussion. And y'all know it's been a minute since I've been on YouTube busting the StreamYard. So hold on just a minute. Here we go. Trying to see who's in the comments. Shout out to One Love over here on Twitter Spaces. We're doing it live on Twitter Spaces. Oh, okay. Shout out to Tiff West. Amazing Tiff West. Just so awesome. Thanks for pulling up, Tiff. Appreciate you. We're about to do this. Really, it's a book discussion on the new Jim Crow. And the author is Michelle Alexander. Now, one of the reasons why this is relevant today is because of something that really just happened in the news. So if you guys can, share the show, hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, okay? And I'm just going to be right back because I got to work this out over here on these Twitter Spaces real quick. Oh, shoot. So stand by, y'all. Okay, so again, thanks for pulling up. Really just doing a quick test right here. So if you can hear me in the Twitter space, y'all put a heart up, a thumbs up, or something up. Can y'all hear me? And I don't know if I can hear you right now. You there, Rella?
I'm here.
Okay, awesome. Hey, thank you so much for pulling up. Appreciate it. If y'all will share the Twitter space. Shout out to Pink Eyes. You know you got it going on.
Hey, shout out to Black Majority State.
Yeah.
He actually shouted you out in social.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Okay, and shout out to social. So, Pink Eyes, I don't know if you can manipulate back and forth and maybe drop a social link up in here, but I want to get right into it because I want to respect everybody's time. And again, okay, here's what we're going to do. I've had this book. I've been wanting to do this book review on it. And I've just been, I graduated recently. And I was like, okay, but here's something that just came out in the news, which is out of control. And if this ain't Jim Crow, I don't know what is. So I'm going to play this clip. Y'all know how I do. I like to make sure you're informed about what we're about to discuss. So let's get into this clip. This is, you know what? Let's just roll that footage. Here we go.
A moment 12 years in the making. 40-year-old Tyrone Clay, with his hands held high, walking out of the Cook County Jail a free man.
Feel good after 12 years. Feel real good.
Clay and Edgardo Colon were charged in connection with the 2011 murder of Chicago police officer Clifton Lewis. Lewis was killed in a robbery while off-duty working his second job as a security officer at a convenience store in the Austin neighborhood. The charges against the two men were dropped Wednesday ahead of a hearing during which police and prosecutors were set to be questioned over their handling of the 2011 investigation. Cole's attorneys say this case was botched from the beginning.
They rushed to judgment and they engaged in some conduct that was improper and resulted in a coerced confession of one of the co-defendants, and then they built a case around a coerced confession.
I forgive them, but I won't ever forget what they did to me. They took all these years out of my life for nothing.
Co-defendant Edgardo Colon was sentenced for 84 years in prison before his conviction was overturned in 2020. Since then, he'd been on electronic monitoring, waiting for a second trial.
My condolences to Clifton Lewis family. Hopefully they do find the real perpetrators and get closure for them also.
There was a rush to charge and convict, and that's not really honoring the legacy of a dedicated police officer, which is what Clifton Lewis was.
Defense attorneys had been prepared to release evidence, including cell phone tower data obtained by the FBI.
Not only is there no evidence that none of them were near the crime scene, the cell tower analysis shows they were not together at all.
The Cook County State's Attorney's Office explaining its decision in a statement saying, in light of previous rulings suppressing the statements of both defendants, and after a thorough and exhaustive review of the remaining evidence against those defendants, independent of the outcome of today's scheduled hearing, the Cook County State's Attorney's Office does not believe it can meet its burden of proof at trial. A third man connected to this case, Alexander Villa, was convicted but not sentenced. His attorney telling ABC7 she hopes to get his case dismissed as well.
Okay, so I'm going to trust and believe that the people in the Twitter space, Rella, unmute your mic and let me know if you were able to hear that. My people in the YouTube chat, Baby Shay, don't go nowhere. I got to fix your situation, love. Like I said,
Yep, I can hear that loud and clear.
okay, awesome. So, y'all, can you imagine being locked down? This man was locked down since 2011. Now, does anybody in either space remember where or what they were doing in 2011? Because I can think of some things. This man was in jail that entire time. That's baloney. So why does that lead us into this Jim Crow? Well, because mass incarceration is a key component of Jim Crow. Now, I don't know, Rella, you got the mic. I don't know if you have any thoughts that you want to share on this before we start delving into this chapter.
Well, the biggest thing about mass incarceration is, I'm always going to go back to the original playbook. Mass incarceration was a systemic issue that came off the heels of Black Code vagrancy laws. Mm-hmm. That immediately, soon after emancipation, the enslaved population that was freed had nowhere to go. So the moment they stepped off of the plantation, it was like an incentive on top of plantation owners receiving money mm-hmm. for lost contraband. The moment these enslaved people ex-slaves stepped off the plantation, they were recaptured right. into the system that we know of today through mass incarceration.
Absolutely.
So if you ask me, I believe mass incarceration are the Black Code and the vagrancy laws today that mm-hmm. were remastered right. into what we call mass incarceration. We're not finding the correlation because we're not calling them Black codes. We're right. not talking about vagrancy laws, and they're still on the books today. If we really want to be honest, they're just renamed.
Yeah, codes by another name. Absolutely. So yeah, this is something that and shout out to everybody in the Twitter space, y'all. Please share the space. Share the space. My YouTube channel is in the Jumbotron, so please subscribe to my YouTube channel because I'm trying to do some things and we're trying to take it over to social, SOXCIAL. What is it? Funded by social. So here's the biggest.
Fundedly social.
Thank you.
You're welcome, boo.
Thank you. So here is something. When I started reading this book, I was shocked. Okay, I was shocked. It blew my mind. It actually made me put the book down. I'm like, wait a minute. I can't put all this together. I can't assimilate this yet. Did you know that there was a time in the 1970s when prisons and the idea and the concept of prison was considered to be on its way out? Let me find this quote. Again, this is the New Jim Crow, written by Michelle Alexander, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Color Blindness. Michelle states here that this is an astonishing development, especially given that as recently as the mid 1970s, the most well respected criminologists were predicting that the prison system would soon fade away. Prison did not deter crime significantly. Many experts had concluded those who had meaningful economic and social opportunities were unlikely to commit crimes regardless of the penalty, while those who went to prison were far more likely to commit crimes again in the future. So these criminologists came together and they said, you know what? We need to get away from the penal institution, the juvenile institutions. This needs to stop because all it's going to do is create more criminals. Now, can you imagine that when we look at today and we look at just recent history, that somebody was actually giving intelligent thought to just doing away with the penal institution altogether? Anybody? Pink? Second Chance, is that you, Rella? Any thoughts on that, y'all?
Yeah, I mean, it just seems like they were really trying their best to try to come up with a different way, to develop ways to recapture, their commodity, their, benefactors of ways of making a fortune.
Right.
If the prison system today were to collapse, I do believe a part of America would probably collapse along with it.
Absolutely. And also in this book, somewhere in this book, they talk about how the United States is the largest, has the largest jail, incriminates, or as you were, criminalizes, has the most number of people imprisoned, other than Russia. I think they come second to Russia. And that was when this book was written. So I'd really like to see what the numbers are there. So the objective for today, and as we go through this book, is not to read it verbatim. I'm just going to pull out some key points on here. But I'm going to tell you right now, we're going to be doing this in a pop-up style. So if you don't have the book, get it. Because this book is amazing. So I am going to read a section in this book. It's called, it's in chapter 1. The chapter is The Rebirth of Caste. And of course, they're talking about the caste system and how that came into play. And if you get the book, you'll be able to read it and get more details. And at some point, we may discuss it. But in this section, in chapter 1, it's talking about the birth of slavery. And I know some people say, oh, would you please quit talking about slavery? But we have to talk about it because the fact that we don't talk about it is what's leaving everything blank. It's giving individuals the opportunity to play like they don't know. And it's so amazing to me that individuals are offended. We have all these laws out here now. No DEI, no CRT. Don't say the B word. We ain't talking about the bitch word. We talking about black. I mean, but what does seem to just be permanent is people's racist behavior. So you don't want CRT, you don't want to discuss our issues as Black Americans, but somehow that racist mentality, that racist behavior is alive and well. So that's problematic. So I'm going to read this section here. It's called The Birth of Slavery. I'm going to read it quick, and here we go. Back there before Jim Crow, before the invention of the Negro or the white man, or the words and concepts to describe them, the colonial population consisted largely of a great mass of white and black bondsmen who occupied roughly the same economic category and were treated with equal contempt by the lords of the plantation and the legislatures. Curiously, unconcerned about their color, these people worked together and relaxed together. That's from Lerone Bennett Jr. So there was a time, and if you recall any of Dr. Claude Anderson, where in his book Black Labor, White Wealth, where he talked about how, Black Americans used to be, there was actually a working relationship with the Jewish community. They actually worked together, but they worked us. You know what I'm saying? They worked us to the point where they got what they needed, and of course we got what we got now. Anybody want to jump in and share some thoughts or opinions? Shout out to Governor from the liquor store. Okay. Any thoughts or comments? All right. Well,
I have a thought, but I want to come back. I'm going to come back to that point. I'm
okay.
going to let you keep going.
Okay, that's fine. Y'all share the show. Please subscribe to my YouTube channel. It is in the Jumbotron. Okay. So the book goes on, this chapter goes on to say, the concept of race is a relatively recent development, only in the past few centuries, owing largely to European imperialism, have the world's people been classified along racial lines. Here in America, the idea of race emerged as a means of reconciling chattel slavery, as well as the extermination of American Indians, with the ideals of freedom preached by whites in the new colonies. In the early colonial period, when settlements remained relatively small, indentured servitude was the dominant means of securing cheap labor. Under this system, whites and blacks struggled to survive against a common enemy, what historian Lerone Bennett Jr. describes as the big planter apparatus and a social system that legalized terror against black and white bondsmen. Initially, blacks brought to this country were not all enslaved. Now, let me do a sidebar and say, that's interesting. They were not all enslaved. Many were treated as indentured servants. As plantation farming expanded, particularly tobacco and cotton farming, demand increased greatly for both labor and land. The demand for land was met by invading and conquering larger and larger swaths of territory. American Indians became a growing impediment to white European progress, and during this period, the images of American Indians promoted in books, newspapers, and magazines became increasingly negative. As sociologists Keith Kilty and Eric Swank have observed, eliminating savages is less of a moral problem than eliminating human beings, and therefore American Indians came to be understood as a lesser race, uncivilized savages, thus providing a justification for the extermination of native peoples. Now I'm going to stop right there. Any comment, any, if you're in the YouTube space, just tell me to drop the link. You can come on up here and chop it up with me. Rella?
This is the part where you get people to really start to understand the connection between where Black, Native, Indigenous, or Black Native Americans come from, and why they end up with the name freedmen, along with the freedmen population that came off of the plantation from those who were from the owners of the 13 colonies. And so it's very, very, this will be the bridge, I believe, that will allow people to open up their purview when it comes to history. So I love it. I really do.
Absolutely.
And the understanding of who were all classified as freedmen, and why it was so important to understand from a historical context emancipation on such a broader scale. So this is going to be great.
Absolutely. And the one thing I was thinking about is it's so crazy because when slavery was abolished and they did all that, and the slave masters, the former slave masters, they got their reparations. Okay, they got their reparations. We never got ours. So that's just a side note, but it ain't nothing new to most of the people in the mix. But let me keep on moving around with this. The growing demand for labor on plantations was met through slavery. American Indians were considered unsuitable as slaves, largely because native tribes were clearly in a position to fight back. The fear of raids by Indian tribes led plantation owners to grasp for an alternative source of free labor. European immigrants were also denied were also deemed poor candidates for slavery, not because of their race, but rather because they were in short supply, and enslavement would quite naturally interfere with voluntary immigration to the new colonies. Plantation owners thus viewed Africans, who were relatively powerless, as the ideal slaves. Their systematic enslavement of Africans and the rearing of their children under bondage emerged with all deliberate speed, quickened by events such as Beacon's Rebellion. Now, shout out to Lysandra Gillard in the YouTube space. Baby Shay, that wrench should be working for you. Y'all do like Baby Shay say, hit the like button, share, subscribe if you haven't already. Um, and what I just read is exactly what Dr. Claude Anderson spoke about and wrote about in his Black Labor, White Wealth. It was easier to enslave those of us Africans who came over here because we didn't have nowhere to go. We were stuck. Okay. Moving forward, Nathaniel Bacon was a white property owner in Jamestown, Virginia, who managed to unite slaves, indentured servants, and poor whites in a revolutionary effort to overthrow the planter elite. Although slaves clearly occupied the lowest position in the social hierarchy and suffered the most under the plantation system, the condition of indentured whites was barely better, and the majority of free whites lived in extreme poverty. As explained by historian Edmund Morgan, in colonies like Virginia, the planter elite with huge land grants occupied a vastly superior position to workers of all colors. Southern colonies did not hesitate to invent ways to extend the terms of servitude, and the planter class accumulated uncultivated lands to restrict the option of free workers. The simmering resentment against the planter class created conditions that were ripe for revolt. So now that part is interesting. That's something I didn't know, that Nathaniel Bacon was a white man. But it's interesting that they took that the poor white or the impoverished, the same type of individuals who came over to this country, talking about they have met their what do they call it? Their manifest destiny. Okay, they treated those are who the same people that took on slaves. They came over here like that. Y'all know what I'm talking about? That was highlighted in Claude Anderson's book as well. But all of the impoverished white people didn't become slave masters, and those who didn't make it to become a slave master were treated like slaves. Any comments? Any thoughts? Anybody?
Yeah, I have.
We got two requests.
Okay. I see you in there, Governor. Go ahead on, Governor. What's T?
Yeah, what's going on, Miss Mel?
You baby.
Yeah, the story is Bacon's Rebellion. It's where the leaders, Nathaniel Bacon, rounded up all of, what I'm saying, people around him and, tried to start a rebellion, but he died from dysentery before the rebellion actually kicked off.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he had the shit. But he was hanging out with him in the mountains.
Okay.
Because that's where he was hanging out, you know what I'm saying? Because he's kind of like, let's say the regular elitists were like the Kardashians.
Mm.
And, he was kind of like Z-list. So he didn't really fit in with the upper.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that makes sense because I was totally unaware of that. And thanks for that brief overview. That's the governor. Y'all follow him on Twitter. He's everywhere, y'all. Hashtag TLS. That'll help you find him. The liquor store. Okay. He's also on station here in the whole 9 yards.
And I'm gonna
Yeah.
do a plug a quick commercial.
Please do.
If you would love to follow, please check out Audible. You can easily have access to the new Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander book's discussion as we are moving through the material. And that is an easy way to get around if you don't want to order the books. I'll also drop a couple of links for some really good resources for people to be able to pick up these books at an affordable price.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rella. One love. Thank you so much. Okay, so let's continue to go through here because we're getting somewhere with this, y'all. I just want to lay this foundation. Okay, varying accounts of Beacon's rebellion abound, but the basic facts are these: Beacon developed plans in 1675 to seize Native American lands in order to acquire more property for himself and others and nullify the threat of Indian raids. When the planter elite in Virginia refused to provide militia support for his scheme, Beacon, or Bacon, retaliated, leading an attack on the elite, their homes, and their property. He openly condemned the rich for their oppression of the poor and inspired an alliance of white and black bond laborers, as well as slaves who demanded an end to their servitude. The attempted revolution was ended by force and false promises of amnesty. A number of people who participated in the revolt were hanged. The events in Jamestown were alarming to the planter elite, who were deeply fearful of the multiracial alliance of bond workers and slaves. Word of Beacon's rebellion spread far and wide, and several more uprisings of a similar type followed. In an effort to protect their superior status and economic position, the planters shifted their strategy for maintaining dominance. They abandoned their heavy reliance on indentured servants in favor of the importation of more black slaves. Instead of importing English-speaking slaves from the West Indies, who were more likely to be familiar with European language and culture, many more slaves were shipped directly from Africa. These slaves would be far easier to control and far less likely to form alliances with poor whites. So it's always a strategy. Somebody, come on, somebody jump on the mic. Unmute your
All right,
mic.
we got Miss Hilda. How you doing, Miss Hilda?
Hey, Miss Hilda.
Hey, how are you?
Great.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was. They were always trying to perfect the institution of slavery, and that's how it actually became the institution. Whatever issues or problems they faced along the way, they passed laws to uh, perfect it. Whatever issues they had, and the goal was to pretty much and all the same thing was done with black women. They, because it was called, I think, what paradise. It was called something where they changed the status from the father, which were white Europeans, and that's how Britain did it. The father got to choose what happened with the kids to find them work, and normally it was if they were poor, indentureship. And because a lot of slaves were biracial, it wasn't conducive for the planters, because the white father could come back and say those are my kids, and he can either set them free or enslave them himself. So that wasn't conducive to a slave owner. So they changed. It's called paradise sequitur ventrem. That's what it's called. So they changed the status of the child from, the father to the mother. And that would be a black woman, right? Because they're in Africa. It's, nothing they can do. They couldn't fight in court to free themselves or anything. So, they kept perfecting the laws as they went along. The institution of slavery.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Now,
Yes.
what was the point of too? Also, they saw a more value in the black indentured than they did whites. Correct?
Yeah.
Or am I wrong?
No. You're right. That's what he said. That So they found more value in the actual slaves. So they said
Mhm.
bump the indentured slaves because those were, I guess, primarily coming from the West Indies. And the fact that, as Michelle indicates here, that they were English speaking, they were more familiar with the European language and culture, and so they would for them to turn their nose up, or even what do they call it, roast them, okay, roast,
Right.
So they were
Well,
like,
well,
oh, go ahead, go ahead.
well, and then I want to bring it back to how we were correlating this to even mass incarceration
Mm-hmm,
today,
mm-hmm,
because with mass incarceration today, as what that was, indentured servitude, again, you see the disparities of how white, non-black Americans are treated in the system and their sentencing, right? Versus black Americans treated in the system. So if you look at that tailoring, they even recognized then that it would be beneficial to make the black indentured service lifetime, put them into lifetime enslavement
mm-hmm.
versus giving them a particular set time to actually be freed.
Absolutely.
And that part is the wild part, because that has not changed.
Right. And it's been, and the thing about it is, it's been beneficial for them, because as long as the labor is free, they don't got to share none of the profits. That's how it is right now. So let me move further on in here. So they determined, you know what, bump these intellectual, and just let me make this point real quick. So for them to bring Africans over here and enslave them, and then run this, Jedi mind trick and say, well, y'all are ignorant, y'all don't know nothing, y'all ain't hip to nothing. But you know good and well, people of the same level of melanin were your equals coming out of the West Indies. Were your equals coming from this European place in the world. They understood your language and your culture. So to run the game on us like y'all don't need to know how to read. Y'all have 3/5 of a human being. Come on, miss us with all of that. But let me get through. I'm going to get through the rest of these pieces here. So let me see. I think I missed my spot here. Hold on. Okay, here we go. And the other key point is that if you notice, there were some alliances with people who were white. And if you notice, back in this time frame, it wasn't the immigrant population who is now trying to claim that they have suffered and toiled and done all of the things that we did as Black Americans. Y'all weren't even over here. So let's get that part clear. Y'all not even in the history books at this time. So let's start there. All right. So, fearful that such measures might not be sufficient to protect their interests, the planter class took an additional precautionary step, a step that would later come to be known as a racial bribe. Deliberately and strategically, the planter class extended special privileges to poor whites in an effort to drive a wedge between them and black slaves. White settlers were allowed greater access to Native American lands. White servants were allowed to police slaves through slave patrols and militias, and barriers were created so that free labor would not be placed in competition with slave labor. These measures effectively eliminated the risk of future alliances between black slaves and poor whites. Poor whites suddenly had a direct personal stake in the existence of a race-based system of slavery. Their own plight had not improved by much, but at least they were not slaves. Once the planter elite split the labor force, poor whites responded to the logic of their situation and sought ways to expand their racially privileged position. And that's what we have going on even now. When you look at Chicago, okay? Chicago just last month, 6 weeks ago, did this legislation to take $51 million, which was earmarked specifically for these new immigrants. All the while, Chicago been sitting on some COVID-19 slush funds, and the Chicago citizens, American citizens, have been living under viaducts and been homeless all this time. But see, by doing this and positioning them and building them up and sustaining them and propping them up, wouldn't that draw a wedge? There's a wedge now. So even these immigrants who they're not looked at as equal to white America. They're not looked at as equal, but there's definitely a wedge now between Black Americans and immigrants. Anybody have any thoughts on that? Anybody on the panel? All right, getting the hundreds up in there. Okay, so we'll keep it going. But and this also talks about how this privilege is persistent. So now y'all they feeling like they're privileged. Y'all not privileged.
Well, what about those that work in the fields now? And it's crazy because agriculture was actually stripped from us even during reindustrialization.
Mm-hmm.
And so now if we're looking at, you know, people coming into the United States telling, you know, American descendants, you know, who came from a background of families who owned farms and lands, and we were the cultivators, only to be moved out of that land today, as what you're seeing happening down in Florida and around the country, where people are saying, well, you know, if we're not going to be classified as citizens, then, you know, y'all good luck on picking your own food. Well, we've been doing that.
Right.
The problem is it's not us, it's the people who keep hiring people from other countries to come in and almost lay waste to the economic foundation for people in America to actually become the agriculturalists, to make sure that we start to get into that form of working and producing like we were.
Right. And not being dependent on, you know, immigrants or
labor.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I do want to shout out Arlen Browning, who said, even the Asian bill. I'm just saying, you're absolutely right. That is divisive. That's divisive. How is it that the Asian crime bill, they got it all? And I'm not even going to go in there because we ain't even there yet, but you're absolutely right, Island. That Asian crime bill was a slap in the face, especially when you see everything on social media now that is showing that it ain't us. It's not Black Americans that's that's committing all of that. They didn't need protection from us. They needed protection from their self and others. And we're not in that number. Shout out to Real Talk with Lady D. So, and to your point, Rella, as we get through here, there was a time when Black farmers and white farmers were actually working together, but they had to come up with a conspiracy theory in order to drive a wedge there. Because if we work together, then we will dismantle these things. So let me keep going through here. I
think you got Miss Jones.
Okay.
Miss Hilda Jones.
Okay.
Johnson.
You got it, Miss Jones.
Miss Johnson. You know, I always see. I always see
I know.
E on there.
You can't see the whole name.
You got it. You got it. Go ahead.
I do the same thing too.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry.
But I just wanted to say it's true with the white people that, you know, some white people that had farms, they couldn't compete with the slave owning white people that had a lot of slaves, but they didn't mind it. They didn't mind it as long as they were, you know, doing better than the Black or considered better than the Black slaves.
Absolutely.
And the same thing happens today with these poor whites who keep voting for Republicans, even though Republicans actually don't do anything for them, but they vote for them to keep them in power, so they don't give us anything, to block us from getting anything.
Right.
And so it's the same thing, or the same psychology and brainwashing from, you know, back then during chattel slavery that white people still do today.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Was there anybody else on the mic, Rella? Because if not, I'm going to go ahead and keep moving through this book.
that was it. That was
Okay.
that's it for now.
Okay, perfect. So by the mid 1770s, and shout out to everybody in the Twitter space, y'all. Thanks for pulling up. I appreciate y'all. I'm over here on YouTube and Facebook. Okay, but y'all subscribe to my YouTube channel. Trying to get my numbers up. I'm trying to be a little more consistent. Okay. So anyway, but thank you all for pulling up. I appreciate y'all so much. All right, so back to the New Jim Crow by Michelle Alexander. By the mid 1770s, the system of bond labor had been thoroughly transformed into a racial caste system predicated on slavery. The degraded status of Africans was justified on the ground that Negroes, like the Indians, were an uncivilized, lesser race, perhaps even more lacking in intelligence and laudable human qualities than the red-skinned natives. The notion of white supremacy rationalized the enslavement of Africans even as whites endeavored to form a new nation based on the ideals of equality, liberty, and justice for all. Before democracy, chattel slavery in America was born. And this is why they ain't trying to have, this is why they're taking books out, banning books, banning CRT. Island, I want to address this comment you have in here. You said correct, and they were perpetuating the hate, but it was a white man who killed all those Asians in that salon, but somehow that was put on us. Yeah, I mean, it's all a strategy. It's all a strategy. Okay, so it may be impossible to overstate the significance of race in defining the basic structure of American society. The structure and content of the original Constitution was based largely on the effort to preserve a racial caste system, slavery, while at the same time affording political and economic rights to whites, especially propertied whites. The Southern slaveholding colonies would agree to form a union only on the condition that the federal government would not be able to interfere with the right to own slaves. Northern white elites were sympathetic to the demand for their property rights to be respected, as they too wanted the Constitution to protect their property interests. As James Madison put it, the nation ought to be constituted to protect the minority of the opulent against the majority. Consequently, the Constitution was designed so the federal government would be weak, not only in its relationship to private property, but also in relationship to the rights of states to conduct their own affairs. The language of the Constitution itself was deliberately colorblind. The words slave or Negro were never used, but the document was built upon a compromise regarding prevailing racial caste system. Federalism, the division of power between the states and the federal government, was the device employed to protect the institution of slavery and the political power of slaveholding states. So even though the method for determining proportional representation in Congress and identifying the winner of a presidential election, in parentheses, the Electoral College, even though those were specifically developed with the interest of slaveholders in mind. So under the terms of our country's founding document, slaves were defined as 3/5 of a man, not a real whole human being. Upon this racist fiction rests the entire structure of American democracy. So when we say, hey, I don't want to talk about slavery, you have to, because this is where it started. Now, how do you interact with a West Indian who's black? Because at that time, now, and y'all in the Twitter space, y'all really know it. Now we're talking about delineation, and yeah, a black American is not the same as a Haitian who is black in skin tone. But back then, y'all know they wasn't trying. If you had black skin, you was just black. The only thing that might have made that delineation is the fact that you came and had some European history and experience. And so that's the only thing that distinguished you. But other than that, you were viewed based on your skin color. And so it didn't matter. So when we say, oh, we don't need to talk about slavery. Yeah, well, we don't need to talk about it, but we damn sure need to start there. How about that?
You know what? And it's so funny you said that, because when you listen to people have those discussions in regards to, well, who is, linked to this land, and who came from elsewhere. There is no challenge that there were, during chattel slavery, there were people who were trafficked, and I call it trafficked through human trafficking through the chattel slavery, right? And the slave trade. But then when you start to now talk about what it looks like today, and for us today, we are so far removed from, I think, the people who had come the first time that we have to map. That's why genealogy is so important, that we have to map our way back, Hansel and Gretel style, if you will, to who it is that, we might have amalgamation or attachment to. So I think there is a level of respect to be put on the immediate descendants that we would be connected to in this generation, who served into, the Revolutionary War, who served the Civil War, those who served in, World War I and, World War II. And those were ancestors that are still, some in World War II might, be elder in age, are still alive, but they can recall and tell you stories about what it was like living down south.
Exactly.
So when we say to put respect on the name of the American descendant, that is who we're talking to. That is the part where we're saying that we're not one big Negro.
Right. Right. And don't be offended that we're telling you what time it is. Let's stop
Exactly.
at all that. Let's just stop at all that. Because if you notice, and it's been said before, I'm not the first to say it, but if you notice, whenever an immigrant rightfully earns an award or a prestigious position because they've done something, spectacular, or something that has changed the culture or society, or, something of that nature, they make sure that they pay homage to their roots, to where they come from. So if you can do that with that level of ease, what's wrong? Why there shouldn't be a problem with us doing it. But we'll save that argument and that discussion for another day, because that's a whole nother topic. So I'm going to continue to move forward in this book. And remember, I'm not reading the entire chapter. I'm just laying some foundation. This next subject is, or subheading is called The Death of Slavery. Now, it's important because I'm trying to walk us up to Jim Crow. Because the truth of the matter is, y'all, and I got it in the description, Jim Crow been in the mix. Jim Crow been sliding in the DMs, okay? Been lurking around the corners. And one good prime example is Jordan Neely, who was killed by that, called himself a Marine. He didn't have the character of a Marine. He was just enlisted. But that's a Jim Crowism, where he's rewarded for killing this black man, and there's no repercussion. I mean, Jim Crow lets that happen. So anyway, but let me stay focused. The death of slavery. The history of racial caste in the United States would end with the Civil War if the idea of race and racial difference had died when the institution of slavery was put to rest. But during the 4 centuries in which slavery flourished, the idea of race flourished as well. Indeed, the notion of racial difference, specifically the notion of white supremacy, proved far more durable than the institution that gave birth to it. White supremacy over time became a religion of sorts, faith in the idea that people of African race were bestial, that whites were inherently superior, and that slavery was in fact for blacks' own good, served to alleviate the white conscience and reconcile the tension between slavery and the democratic ideas espoused by whites in the so-called New World. There was no contradiction in the bold claim made by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal. If Africans were not really people, racism operated as a deeply held belief system based on truths beyond question or doubt. This deep faith in white supremacy not only justified an economic and political system in which plantation owners acquired land and great wealth through the brutality, torture, and coercion of other human beings, it also endured, like most articles of faith, long after the historical circumstances that gave rise to the religion passed away. In Wacquant's words, and you have to forgive me for mispronouncing this guy's name. In Waquan's words, racial division was a consequence, not a precondition of slavery. But once it was instituted, it became detached from its initial function and acquired a social potency all its own. After the death of slavery, the idea of race lived on. Anybody have any thoughts about what I've just read? Anybody? All right, shout out. Let me. Island Brown says, Mel, I know you're serious, but I laughed at Jim being in the DMs. But you're absolutely. He was. Jim Crow's still in the DMs. Jim Crow is everywhere. It never ended, and it ain't. And it's not. It can end. It can end, and I think the more that I think that the more non-melanated individuals come to realize what the real strategy has been. Y'all, if y'all not up here with the elite, y'all might as well be the same skin tone as us. Y'all might as well have our melanin because you're not respected as though you're them. I don't know how y'all feel about it, but that's my opinion. One of the most compelling accounts of the post-emancipation period is The Strange Career of Jim Crow, written by C. Vaughn Woodward in 1955. The book continues to be the focal point of study and debate by scholars and was once described by Martin Luther King Jr. as the historical Bible of the civil rights movement. As Woodward tells the story, the end of slavery created an extraordinary dilemma for Southern white society. Without the labor of former slaves, the region's economy would surely collapse. And without the institution of slavery, there was no longer a formal mechanism for maintaining racial hierarchy and preventing amalgamation with a group of people considered intrinsically inferior and vile. This state of affairs produced a temporary anarchy and a state of mind bordering on hysteria, particularly among the planter elite. I'm sure they was pulling their hair out talking about what we gonna do. We ain't got no more free labor. You got people that looking good. They trying to holler at the non-melanated. Oh, we can't. What we gonna do? And all through slavery, we demonstrated our ingenuity as a race, as a God-blessed people. So of course we was a threat. Even at our worst, we intimidated them. Even in chains and bonds, we were still an intimidation to them. Help us out. All right. So, without the labor of former slaves, the region's economy would surely collapse. And without the institution of slavery, there was no longer a formal mechanism for maintaining racial hierarchy and preventing amalgamation with a group of people considered intrinsically inferior and vile. This state of affairs produced a temporary anarchy and a state of mind bordering on hysteria, particularly among the planter elite. But even among poor whites, the collapse of slavery was a bitter pill. In the antebellum South, the lowliest white person at least possessed his or her white skin, a badge of superiority over even the most skilled slave or prosperous free African American. So essentially what that's saying is that even the poorest white person could say, shout out to Tariq Nasheed, because I heard him coin this phrase, I'm white and I say so. All right. While Southern whites, poor and rich alike, were utterly outraged by emancipation, there was no obvious solution to the dilemma they faced. Following the Civil War, the economic and political infrastructure of the South was in shambles. Plantation owners were suddenly destitute, and state governments, shackled by war debt, were penniless. Large amounts of real estate and other property had been destroyed in the war industry and was disorganized, and hundreds of thousands of men had been killed or maimed. With all of this went the demoralizing effect of an unsuccessful war and the extraordinary challenges associated with rebuilding new state and local governments. Add to all of this, the sudden presence of 4 million newly freed slaves, and the picture becomes even more complicated. Southern whites, Woodard explains, strongly believed that a new system of racial control was clearly required, but it was not immediately obvious what form it should take. Under slavery, the racial order was most effectively maintained by a large degree of contact between slave owners and slaves, thus maximizing opportunities for supervision and discipline and minimizing the potential for active resistance or rebellion. Strict separation of the races would have threatened slaveholders' immediate interest and was, in any event, wholly unnecessary as a means of creating social distance or establishing the inferior status of slaves. Following the Civil War, it was unclear what institutions, laws, or customs would be necessary to maintain white control now that slavery was gone. Nonetheless, as numerous historians have shown, the development of a new racial order became the consuming passion for most white Southerners. Rumors of a great insurrection terrified whites, and blacks increasingly came to be viewed as menacing and dangerous. In fact, the current stereotypes of black men as aggressive, unruly predators can be traced to this period when whites feared that an angry mass of black men might rise up and attack them or rape their women. Now, the Twitter space, what y'all talking about? Any thoughts, any comment on what I've just read? Hello, somebody.
Yeah, that's kind of what we have, that mass hysteria that we have going on today. You know, that there's this fear of somehow non-black women being, accosted by black men.
Mm-hmm.
They created even depictions of black men as King Kong.
Mm-hmm.
The movie King Kong actually was in reference to the historical depiction of black men somehow being lusted after their women, and this beast, comes back to terrorize the society.
Yeah.
And so that picture
Mm-hmm.
laid the groundwork of what we see today, even with the fear of young boys being shot in the chest,
Right.
even the conversation around poor white men, worried about, and they passed that on. Let me be clear. They passed that on to even other immigrants that come into the country.
Right.
To depict black men in such a deplorable and heinous way, that we never can ever get around, levels of protection that black men do require, because you have people walking around here in false fear.
Right.
Of not even any evidence being real, but false fear.
Right. And, and thanks for bringing those points up, Bella. And when you were speaking, I was thinking about Jonathan Majors, for example. Look how easy this man went from being the box office seller, the number one stunner. And now look at him. Look at what they've done to him, and only to find out
overnight.
Come on.
Overnight, right?
Come on.
Overnight.
I told you Jim Crow in the DMs. Look at
and you know what, Mel, too, to make this point, and I'm gonna land. We don't even have enough room to even say, okay, well, there are issues that we do face, but they just put all of the black men in one big old pot.
Yeah. That's it. And so it's just a major impact that we have to, I guess, if I don't know what's going to happen or how we're going to change it. But I think one thing for certain is making sure that we are aware and we see their strategy as they've played it out. Because one thing that's been clear to me is this division between lower socioeconomic people and making sure that they don't come together. It's like in the Bible, if anybody reads the Bible, the Tower of Babel. All those people got together, and at first they all were able to speak the same language. They all understood each other, and they were all working together. Okay? And if you know how that went down, well, you know how that goes down. But this is a strategy that's used in a negative way, because what kind of society would we have, just this country alone, would we have if all people were able to work together? But instead, the purpose is to divide us and pit us against each other. And we are the target. Black Americans are the target. They don't care. As long as you aren't Black American, then you got an opportunity to be like in this, as Michelle Alexander described them, the poor white individuals who were really in the same position the slaves were in. They didn't have nothing because they were indentured too until they let the white people be free, but they were still low economic. They still didn't have anything going on. They were better off staying, working with us, supporting us, or, supporting Beacon's revolt or whatever. So anyway, I'm going to skip around on this part and start here. It says, meanwhile, the separation of races had begun to emerge as a comprehensive pattern throughout the South, driven in large part by the rhetoric of the planter elite, who hoped to reestablish a system of control that would ensure a low-paid, submissive labor force. Racial segregation had actually begun years earlier in the North as an effort to prevent race mixing and preserve racial hierarchy following the abolition of Northern slavery. It had never developed, he's talking about racial segregation, had never developed, however, into a comprehensive system, operating instead largely as a matter of custom, enforced with varying degrees of consistency. Even among those hostile to Reconstruction, few would have predicted that racial segregation would soon evolve into a new racial caste system as stunningly comprehensive and repressive as the one that came to be known simply as Jim Crow. So, we're going to get into the birth of Jim Crow. We're just not going to do it now because I'm probably going to pop back up tomorrow morning, probably around 10 a.m. So Rella said she's going to put some links in the chat and put them all over the spot of where you can get this book on Kindle or buy it or whatever, however. This book is amazing. And the information that it's just providing some really good insight. So if you think you know, read this book so you can know that you know what you know, okay? Or find out something you didn't know. So before we really just get all the way up out of here, is anyone on the panel, does anyone have any last thoughts that they want to share about what we've covered thus far? Anybody?
So, Miss Johnson, do you have anything that you want to share with us before we head on out? And I think we have one more request. Are we able to take one more request?
Sure, absolutely.
All right.
No, I'm listening.
Hey, is that...
All right, we're getting ready to close out.
Yeah.
So if you have any last words, your voice is definitely appreciated. Dark and Lovely, welcome to the stage and welcome into the room.
Hey, Dark and Lovely.
Thank you so much,
Thanks
lovely lady.
Yes,
Hilda,
thanks for coming.
and everybody else. I just was able to get in, and I just caught like 2 minutes. If you can just catch me up really quick and let me know the next time that we're gonna meet up and talk about this book.
Absolutely.
I truly appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yes, thanks for pulling up, Dark and Lovely, because I appreciate you pulling up. So I tell you what, I forgot to hit the record button on Twitter, but I am. Of course, we're also on YouTube, so the YouTube channel is in the Jumbotron. So please click that link and subscribe to the YouTube channel. I would appreciate it, and come to find out, you guys will appreciate it too. So subscribe, hit the like button, share. Essentially, Dark and Lovely, what we're talking about is the new Jim Crow. Written by Michelle Alexander, and it's really a discussion. So for individuals who've read the book, great. Definitely want you to chime in with what your thoughts are as we go through these chapters. But it's just so interesting because this book is about to break down Jim Crow and the way mass incarceration has demonstrated itself to be a critical component of that. And one thing I said at the beginning of the space, in the 1970s, major criminologists, let me just turn to that page so I can read it. It says that major, well-respected criminologists were predicting that the prison system would soon fade away. That's in the mid 1970s. They said, look, life is good. As long as somebody's got a good job, they ain't going to be doing crime. They don't give a damn what the penalty is. They got a good job. They don't break the law for what? And then they said that these penal institutions, juvenile and adult penal institutions, aren't doing anything but creating more criminals. So these major, well-respected criminologists were saying, just do away with it. And also, one important fact is, at the time this book was written, America and Russia were neck to neck in the maximum number of people that are imprisoned. And I think somewhere in this book, they talk about how America has imprisoned more people than multiple countries. Just all on this one little swath of land, we got more people in prison than multiple countries put together. There's something wrong with that. There's something wrong with that, especially when we talk about the disparity as it relates to race. There's more of us in there. There's more of us in there than anyone else. So
absolutely more of our lineage
come on
in there, than anyone else. Because in New York, the black immigrant rate is just starting to rise. But that's not the case through the 80s, through the crack era.
Right.
And 90s and things of that sort. Even though, Jamaicans, Haitians, Dominicans were the big time drug dealers in New York City of that time, but they just weren't prosecuted the way Black Americans were prosecuted. So I've never read it. I've heard about it. I'm definitely going to check it out so that I'll have something to contribute to the discussion next time, ladies. And I love stuff like this because I love to read. I am a vid reader, and I love this space, and I'm so sorry that I caught it late, and I can't wait for the next one. Thank you guys so much for letting me speak. And this really holds dear to my heart because my mom did a lot of time. This is something that's personal to me, just like the war on drugs, and all that stuff being a part of our reparations claim, being a part of our recent reparations claim, because we are I hate to say fortunate, but I say it because we are a group that is fortunate enough to see when our marriage rates drop and when our crime rates rose. We're fortunate enough to pinpoint exactly when that begins. And I'm 42, so I was born right on that that cutoff. If anybody else is in here a little older. And so I hold this topic like super dear to my heart.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much, guys, for doing this. I'll definitely be here on time next time. And thanks again for letting me speak.
Absolutely. You're so welcome. And I'm going to tell you, even in this book, Michelle Alexander does address this Reagan's war on drugs. And come to find out, I don't even want to get into that part of it because we'll be here another hour. And I'm trying. I want
to say we'll save that one.
Yeah, we'll save it.
Definitely.
Yes, indeed.
But we do have one more before I actually go, and I think it's Second Pieces.
Sure.
Welcome to the stage. What last words do you have for us today?
Hey, how are you guys doing?
Hey,
Thank you so much for this. Oh, great. Thank you so much for the space. Mel, Cruz, you had mentioned earlier how, and in the book it says, even though I haven't read it, it said that the Constitution doesn't specifically mention slaves. Yeah. But it's interesting that with the Dred Scott case, that Chief Justice Roger Taney of Maryland, when he presided over that case and denied Dred his rights in stating that no black man or African is. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
No African has rights that the white man is bound to respect or something to that effect. Right. He, in his interpretation of the Constitution, he was clearly stating what is understood, that, like you were saying, this is all about Native Black Americans, So I just wanted to make that point. Does that make sense?
It does. And thank you because that's actually a poignant point, Second Pieces, because this is all about the strategy. What the author said, what Michelle said was, the Constitution doesn't mention slave and it doesn't mention Negro in it, but the way the laws, the way the strategy was implemented and executed okay, is it clearly negatively adversely impacts Black Americans, period, point blank. So, yeah, very, very good point. And that's actually a good point to close on. So when we come back, and again, y'all, I'm probably going to be on again tomorrow, Saturday, around a good 10 a.m., because we got to get into the birth of Jim Crow. All right. This is just like the Jim Crow is a fictional character. But they said he was out of the what do they used to call those shows? The same with Uncle Tom, minstrel. He's a character out of a minstrel. And I've heard different stories about how Jim Crow came to be. You're just another son of a gun just sitting around saying, you know what, this is what we ought to do. We ought to do it like this. And so I guess that was the smart idea of the day, and they went on ahead and went with it. But we need to get in here and understand these nuances, because when we understand what they did in the past, it's just a blaring light as to how these people, or how Jim Crow is actually being implemented and executed in 2023. Jim Crow is not dead, y'all. Go ahead, Rella. My bad. Go ahead.
No, you are so right. And I wanted to say to Second Piece's point, and even though the Constitution didn't refer directly to slaves until the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, it did not ignore the names that they called, the classifications within. And I think that was the point in regards to even the black codes, the vagrant laws. I think what we have found is that we don't hone into what were they actually calling us under the Republic. Oh, yeah. And we have to remember, when we say the Pledge of Allegiance, we're saying we pledge allegiance to the flag for which it stands under one nation, and to the what? Republic. And so once you start to actually put that together and pay attention to the Constitution, the first article, Section 2, when we come back, hopefully we will have some golden nuggets to reveal to you all. And I'm going to save that for later.
Sure enough. So thank you, Rella. And I'm going to tell you guys one other thing that they're going to talk about in this section that we're going to cover on tomorrow, the birth of Jim Crow. They're going to talk about 3 alternative philosophies of race relations. And they are liberalism, conservatism, and radicalism. So we're going to be talking about that on tomorrow when we hit up this book club. You guys get the book if you can. If not, that's okay, because I'm reading directly from it. I'm just not reading it cover to cover, page by page to page, but I am putting up some key pieces in there to try to highlight and make the correlation between then and now. And I started the show off with the situation in Chicago where the man was jailed, Cook County Jail, and I forgot his name, but it's on the title on the YouTube channel. The man was in jail since 2011. He just got out. Shout out to Jennifer Bongine, who again is on the case. Okay. There were some shenanigans going on through this, and this man's been in jail since 2011. And I was talking to my family earlier today. It's like, so now this man, they dropped all the charges. He's not found guilty. So he doesn't have a criminal record. But when he goes to get a job somewhere, okay, where's he going to say he's been for the past 11 years? And, me and my family were saying, oh, yeah, well, I guess he can say he worked for Cook County Jail. And he was prompt. He showed up on time. I mean, you have taken X number of years out this man's life. And there's nothing to show for it. And there's no remuneration available. He's just, you just out there. It's just like the emancipation all over again. You're freed and you have nothing but the clothes on your back. So with that being said, if y'all can get the book, get it. If not, just don't meet me here, beat me here, because we'll be at it again.
And can I just can I throw this in there?
Yes,
so
please do.
Attached to the space, we have the Audible. So if those of you want to listen up until, what chapter are you in right now?
Chapter 1.
All right. So if you want to listen to chapter 1 and possibly go ahead to chapter 2, to prepare for the next space. There it is Audible. Audible is actually offering 3 months free.
Awesome.
For $0, which is a wonderful deal. abooks.com, abebooks.com has the actual book for about $7, $8 roughly, probably plus shipping. If you want to get a hard copy in between time, of course, Amazon always has a copy that you can order. So, yeah.
Right.
So if you want it right away, and you are willing to pay that, unless you got Prime, go ahead. But if you want to just listen to something reading to you where you don't have to worry about missing the space because you have not caught up, go ahead and get that Audible.
Right. And subscribe to the YouTube channel and the Twitter. So with that being said, I want to thank everybody for pulling up, for contributing. Hit the like button, subscribe, share, Replay Gang, leave a comment. I want to hear from you. That's it. That is the podcast. Hey, until next time, y'all, we will see ya when we see ya. Welcome to the Only Male Cruz Show, the We Own Your Head podcast. Discussing topics that make you say, how and where can we improve as a society? From a Black American's perspective. Copyright disclaimer regarding fair use is in full effect. The views and opinions expressed in this show, you guessed it, they're all mine. Catch us live, be ready to speak. This is a call-in show. Be sure to hit the like button, share, subscribe, Replay Gang, leave a comment. I want to hear from you. Let's go to work.